Well, the rogue had lost his umbrella, and one Sunday morning he decides to go to church and try and steal one. Churches, he thinks, after all, are full of lost umbrellas. While he's there, though, and so as not to arouse suspicion, he decides to stop and listen to the sermon. And this Sunday, the vicar's talking about the Ten Commandments, and frankly, it's not very inspiring. The sermon's boring, and there's no sign of any umbrellas anywhere, and our rogue is beginning to feel like it's a wasted trip. Until suddenly, the vicar reaches the final commandment. Do not covet your neighbour's wife. At which point, the rogue suddenly gets up and walks out of the church, muttering to himself, that's where I left my umbrella. There are other versions, of course. Jesus says, "This is my command, love one another." In Christian terms, when we think of commands, we probably make first reference to the Ten Commandments, the law, as given by God to Moses on Mount Sinai, which then formed the basis of the covenant God made with his people, Israel. I'm sure we're familiar with them. I'm sure we could recite all of them if necessary. Have no other gods. Don't make for yourself an idol. Do not blaspheme, and so on, down to not coveting your neighbour's house or wife. And if we can't remember them, then, as Moses himself said, don't worry, they're saved on the cloud. Ha ha. The thing is with the commandments, though, they only get us so far. They're only ever intended to be partial, a temporary measure, better than nothing but not the definitive deal. Sin had entered the world and human beings were making a right royal mess of looking after the world and themselves. And God gave Moses the Ten Commandments as a guide. Some of it would seem blindingly obvious. Do not commit murder. Well, yeah, but people had, and they were going on doing it. Don't steal, don't commit adultery. Some of it might seem less obvious. Keep the Sabbath. By the way, not Sunday, but Saturday for Jews, and in our case, not even necessarily a specific day, but a principle of rest. God says to Moses, well, tell them to obey these commandments and they'll be okay, then that'll help. The laws are then extended to some 613, giving great detail in all kinds of areas to ensure that the people treat themselves and the world well as honouring God. The trouble is with laws, they don't necessarily make you a good person. You can follow meticulously the laws of the highway code, and it doesn't necessarily make you a good driver. I was reminded of the opposite recently, just last week, when I was caught driving in a bus lane and received a fine. I'm trying to convince myself that it doesn't necessarily make me a bad driver. Jesus came not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. Jesus came to live the perfect life as the perfect example for us to follow. He died the perfect death and rose again on the third day. In sight of the cross, he gives a simpler and yet deeper and richer command. This is my command, he says, love one another. Through the cross, he has shown the greatest possible love. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down his life for his friends. And he says, you are my friends. Jesus has laid down his life for them and for you and for me. He's done it so that we can be more human, not less, to give us freedom and joy. Being a Christian, being a follower of Jesus isn't about rules and laws and don'ts. It's about love. Jesus says to them and to us, go and bear fruit that will last. And how do we do that? Well, through love. Love one another. It really is the greatest thing we can do. It's not hard to look around and see where love is missing. Corruption, greed, violence, war, abuse, prejudice, individual, collective, institutional. I don't need to give examples. We see them sadly all around. And even more sadly, the church hasn't been always and still isn't above reproach. It's not just about being nice. Of course, the world's not an easy place. We might have to disagree well. We might have to show tough love sometimes, as a parent disciplines a child. We might have to be gracious and merciful, but we are called to love one another that we may bear fruit. That's all of us, no exceptions. In a world where people often want their own way, want to achieve and win and progress, maybe there's another way. If you want an example of how to lose graciously, look at Shaun Murphy's response on Monday at losing the World Snooker Final. He's a Christian, and his generosity and warmth in defeat were a shining example of love. It might be through how we live our lives, our life choices, our examples. My grandmother is long dead now. I was terrified of her. Man, she was strict. But I realise now the influence that her Christian faith had on my family. Everything done in love, even if I didn't recognise it at the time. It might be through a particular choice we make, an action we perform, which somehow transforms our life and our world. One act of random kindness, a donation to a food bank which enables a family to eat, a kind word and a smile to a stranger who otherwise won't talk to anyone that day. Jesus loved the world like nobody else has. He personified God's love. As the Father has sent me, as the Father has loved me, so I have loved you. He transformed the lives of people that he met, teaching, healing, inspiring, leading, bringing good news to the lost, the last, and the least. And he tells us to do the same, to love one another. Love is a verb. It's active. It's about doing, making a difference in our everyday lives. It's the relationships we have, the opportunities that come our way, starting with the simplest and smallest. Christmas Island is famous for its red crabs. Every year, literally millions of these red crabs migrate from land to lay their eggs in the ocean, and the beaches around are turned red as they're covered by the crabs. And in the hot Indian Ocean sun, the race is on, and those that don't make it to the cool sea in time find themselves roasted in the heat and perishing. And one day, two people are walking across the shore during the crabs' migration, talking and walking as they dodge the tiny creatures in the midday heat. And every few steps, one of the people bends down, picks up one of the crabs, and tosses it gently back into the ocean to ensure it reaches safety. And after a while, the other person says, "What are you doing? Look at the millions of crabs you see around. What use will it make to save a few? What difference can it possibly make?" And the other person just picks up one more crab, throws it into the ocean and replies, "It'll make a difference to that one." Jesus says, "This is my command. Love one another."